Around 180 currencies are used across 197 countries globally, with some currencies, like the euro and the US dollar, serving as primary currencies in multiple nations. For example, the euro is utilized in over 24 European Union countries, while the US dollar holds primary currency status in about 14 countries. Every nation maintains foreign exchange reserves alongside their own currency, primarily for international trade and financial transactions. Interestingly, approximately 59% of the world's foreign currency reserves are held in US dollars. This reflects the United States' superpower status, with its economy recognized as the strongest globally, and its currency, the US dollar, considered the most influential worldwide. But how did the US dollar evolve from its inception to the present day? Let's explore the journey from its beginnings to now. Our journey begins in 1519, far away in Bohemia. A count by the name of Hieronymus Schlick discovers a treasure trove of silver and decides to mint his own coins. These coins, called Joachimthaler after the valley where they were mined, were eventually shortened to thalers. Their popularity soared, inspiring currencies around the world to adopt similar names, like the Italian thalero and even the Ethiopian tolari. Fast forward to 18th century London. The British Empire is fiercely guarding its gold and silver, forbidding the export of their precious pounds and shillings even to their own colonies across the Atlantic. This left American colonists in a bit of a bind. They couldn't use British currency, but they needed a way to trade. Then came the mighty Mexican peso. Spain was minting vast quantities of silver coins from their Casa de Moneda in Mexico, the oldest active mint in the Americas to this day. These silver coins, worth 8 Spanish reals, became a favorite among American colonists. They even nicknamed them pieces of 8, a term pirates would forever immortalize. Interestingly, the dollar sign itself might have Mexican roots. The abbreviation for peso, peas, is said to have morphed into the familiar dollar symbol through hurried bookkeeping shorthand. However, the flow of silver pesos wasn't exactly one way. Most of these coins ended up back in Europe, used by colonists to purchase imported goods. This left the American colonies constantly cash-strapped. In 1729, Benjamin Franklin, ever the problem solver, noticed the crippling lack of currency in Philadelphia. He anonymously published a pamphlet titled A Modest Inquiry into the Necessity of a Paper Currency, advocating for a revolutionary idea: paper money. Franklin's efforts landed him contracts to print paper currency for Pennsylvania. These notes even featured a famous Franklin quote, "Mind your business," instead of the more traditional, "In God we trust." The British Crown, unsurprisingly, saw this as a rebellious act and promptly outlawed the printing and use of paper money in all colonies by 1764. This growing list of restrictions would ultimately lead to the American colonists revolting against British rule. But revolutions are expensive. Funding an army requires a lot of cash, which the colonists simply didn't have. In 1775, the Continental Congress stepped in, issuing the Continental currency, also known as Continentals. These paper notes were initially valued at par with the Spanish peso, but as millions were printed to finance the war effort, their value plummeted dramatically. They became practically worthless, leading to the saying, "Not worth a Continental." While the American Revolution became the first war financed by paper money, it also left a sour taste in the mouths of American citizens. The Founding Fathers, wary of this paper money debacle, decided to leave the issue of currency out of the Constitution altogether. It would be almost a century before the federal government would print paper money again. With the Coinage Act of 1792, the United States finally established the dollar as its national currency. Ditching the confusing British system of pounds, shillings, and pence, the dollar was divided into 100 equal cents, a radical idea introduced by Thomas Jefferson himself. This decimal system made the US dollar the first currency in the world to be easily represented using decimals. The first US mint opened its doors in Philadelphia on April 2, 1792, predating even the Capitol building and the White House. These early coins featured symbols of liberty, victory, and freedom, a HUGEE contrast to the images of royalty found on European currencies. This tradition of avoiding portraits on coins would continue for almost 100 years. However, the story of US currency doesn't end there. While the federal government shied away from printing paper money, private banks across the country saw an opportunity. These wildcat banks issued their own paper notes, creating a chaotic system of hundreds of different currencies, each with varying value and legitimacy. This era of wildcat banking would eventually come to an end with the National Banking Act of 1863. The Civil War era saw the return of federal paper money. Salmon P. Chase, the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, saw fit to adorn the first $1 bill with his own likeness, a shameless attempt to boost his own image. These greenbacks, named for the green ink used on the reverse side, also suffered from inflation as more and more were printed. The Confederacy also had its own currency during the Civil War, the grayback. Unlike the greenback, the grayback's value plummeted rapidly as the Confederacy's fortunes dwindled. Following the Union victory, both the greenback and the grayback became worthless pieces of paper. Interestingly, Supreme Court Justice Simon P. Chase, yes, the same Salmon P. Chase who put his face on the dollar bill, later argued that the federal government didn't have the constitutional right to issue paper money. This ironic twist highlights the ongoing debate about the role of government in currency. Moving forward, the faces on U.S. banknotes changed frequently, with the exception of George Washington on the $1 bill and Thomas Jefferson on the $2 bill. The $5 bill, for instance, went from featuring a Native American chief to Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, and back to Lincoln again before settling on Alexander Hamilton. In 1913, the Federal Reserve System was established, creating two main types of U.S. currency: Federal Reserve notes and United States notes. Both types of notes underwent design changes throughout the 20th century, primarily to combat counterfeiting. Notably, the iconic Silver Certificate series, which allowed people to hold the value of silver bullion without physically possessing it, was discontinued in 1964. 1956 marked another significant change when "In God We Trust" became the national motto. This phrase was subsequently added to all U.S. currency. Following World War II, the U.S. dollar emerged as the world's dominant reserve currency. This meant that banks and governments worldwide held more U.S. dollars than any other currency, using it as a benchmark for their own currency's value. This dominance stemmed in part from the U.S. dollar being backed by precious metals like gold and silver. However, the 20th century also saw a weakening of this link to precious metals, culminating in its complete severing in 1971 under President Nixon. This event, known as the Nixon shock, transformed the U.S. dollar into a fiat currency. Unlike currencies backed by gold or silver, fiat currencies have value only because the government maintains it and because people trust the government's ability to do so. This shift to a fiat currency presented both challenges and opportunities. On the one hand, it made the U.S. government more flexible in responding to economic crises, as evidenced by the recent ability to print money for the COVID-19 stimulus package. On the other hand, it placed a greater burden on public trust in the government. Reflecting this need for trust, the imagery on U.S. banknotes since the Nixon shock has focused on presidents, statesmen, and Treasury secretaries, figures seen as trustworthy and embodying American ideals. The Secretary of the Treasury has the final say on who gets featured, with the only requirement being that the person is widely recognized for their historical significance. Interestingly, living people are strictly prohibited from appearing on U.S. currency. A more recent example of this selection process involved Harriet Tubman, the famed abolitionist and conductor on the Underground Railroad. In 2016, the Department of the Treasury announced plans to replace Andrew Jackson on the $20 bill with Tubman. However, the Trump administration later delayed this change by 10 years. With the 2024 election on the horizon, the question remains, will 2024 finally be the year we see Harriet Tubman become the face of American currency, or will wait continue? In conclusion, the US dollar has had a fascinating and dynamic history. From its silver coin roots to its current form as a fiat currency, the dollar has constantly adapted to meet the needs of the times. While it may seem like a static and ordinary object in our daily lives, the US dollar story is a proof to the ever-evolving nature of money and its role in society. It's a story of innovation, war, revolution, and ultimately the ever-present human need for a trusted medium of exchange.